you might be wondering why I call this section, which is clearly about answering questions, why I called it outsourcing inside the room. It works like this. People are like Porsches. Porsches are predictable. Porsches are about performance and status. Part of the performance of a human machine is that we are meaning-making machines. When someone tells us a story or gives us an anecdote, we search for a reason that it's relevant, so that you can say pretty much anything in answer for a question, and people will track to discover why you're saying it, which gives you time to find it. So their brains are beginning to work for you because you're pushing the button for the meaning-making machine. This is my CPD hierarchy that I did for this week. We've talked about the leveraging patterns and meaning-making machines. I want to talk to you about some of the other things that are very important when you're answering essentially questions without notice, the questions you might dread. I wanted to talk to you first though about the kind of questions people have talked to me about that they dread, because you might actually find your questions are not a problem in comparison. Let's have a look. So I asked my database to send me stuff. The trainer's classic, I hate this question, does tend to be the why am I in this training, which of course you can always deal with in a why frame. But I'm not going to talk to you about how you solve all of these problems. I just want to give you all of the answers, all the questions, so you can get a sense of it. Trainers who work in leadership often have a terrible time. One person talks about, I get this question all the time from the audience, how am I supposed to provide timely and descriptive feedback to my direct reports when they'll just go running to the boss saying I'm bullying them, the boss doesn't have my back? Or the leadership agreed to this, so why does it now seem like they're not on board? People talked about 14-year-old girls asking a male presenter what sex felt like. Very awkward question to answer. What do you know about this? I've been doing this for 20 years and you're going to teach me. So these are all trainer questions. Some of the questions that presenters hope won't happen often don't happen because the audience is not well enough skilled to ask the question. But sometimes they do. There's a classic story one of my clients told me of a major bank. The chief executive did a little getting to know you meet and greet speech to a group of graduates. The graduates were then asked, essentially given an open slather, what do you want to ask? The chief executive had mentioned he'd grown up in Israel, and so a young man who did not last long in the organisation put his hand up and said, so, you were born in Israel, can you tell us a Jewish joke? Essentially, you can never control what's going to happen in your room, and having a way to keep your presence when presenting, when something out of the blue happens. By the way, that particular bank doesn't do open forum questions for graduates anymore. I think that's a flaw, because I believe that they could just skill the chief executive in dealing with these kinds of questions. That's not a hard question to deal with, because at the bottom line, he can talk about sometimes heritage is important, depending on what he wants to say. Like we said in the last video, if his outcome is to talk about we're a community that welcomes you in, he might say, well, thank you for asking me something that's so personal, and I do appreciate the importance of personal. I was just talking to a group of, insert story here, about shareholders last week, la la la, or he may have had a Jewish joke. But it's probably a story about status to shareholders, and then taking that back to his management. And if his outcome was to show that we actually care about the community, or that we care about what our shareholders think, it doesn't matter what the question is. The answer is, here's a story about how shareholders think. And the reason I'm telling you this story is, it's a Jewish joke that I could even be here. doing this, or whatever it is. You can link back to it because you've had 3 minutes of telling a story you know really, really well, and an outcome you know really well. They're essentially building the bridge between your information and your outcome. That bridge, the reason I'm telling you this story is somehow has to link to a Jewish joke. But it doesn't have to be very strong because the audience is feeling squirmy anyway. Here's one of the important things about that particular story, and one of the important things about how you answer questions. It has to do with status. So this is McClellan's work on essentially on the key values that motivate us all. We are, all of us, going to choose one of these 3 kind of values bases, if you like. So there are people for whom affiliation, community, relationships is very, very important. The story I told you about the bank community working with the community indigenous, affiliation was a major issue that he wanted to get across. There are some of us for whom achievement is important. For that young graduate asking the question of the chief executive, he wasn't asking it to make the executive look bad. He was asking it so that he could say, I asked a question in open forum. Bad question, but he was looking to get achievement. And then there are people who want power or status or control, whatever you want to call it. These are the kind of questions in academic environments. My academic clients tell me part of every question is essentially to ask, why haven't you presented my research? You presented your research, but my research is much more important. I've worked with people working in research in fertility, and they go to each other's presentations and undermine each other's presentations, essentially for, to a certain extent, that sense of power. And because it's a commercial operation and there's a competition involved in who's got the best way to make fertility work. So depending on your values, you're going to find a way to answer the question differently, but you need to plug into what their values are. That your status in the room determines how you can answer. So, for example, there are some times when you could literally answer, I don't know the answer to that question because it's not an important question, but you need to have the status to be able to say that. You can soften that. I don't know the answer to that question. I can tell you, lead into a piece of information around the question. And then talk about the difference between data, how many people visited this particular branch at this particular time, and information, why they visited, what they had, what kind of experience they had, and whether or not they would come back, and whether or not they would recommend us, whether they would recommend us at a barbecue to their friends as something good. Would they defend us, or would they actually go, yep, you're right, they're crap? So data, numbers, isn't as interesting as information. But I wouldn't rawly do that. I would tell a story and then go, so the reason I'm telling you this story is data. How many customers came to a branch isn't much more interesting, isn't anywhere near as interesting as information, all the other things that we've talked about. Depending on your status and their status relative to you, you can answer differently. There is also the option to essentially go, that's an excellent question, why don't we all take a moment to answer that? So depending on where you are and what your presentation is, I use this a lot in training rooms where we've had a period of time to do something and someone puts up a question without notice, how can I do X? And it's kind of something we've treated, but something we haven't treated. Leverage, this is the true outsourcing of the knowledge within the room. Ask them all. Get them all onto a flip chart and then process each one, or onto a blackboard, onto a whiteboard. Grab the marker, put it all up there. If you've got permission and time to do this, then You look smart for having consulted the group, for getting the wisdom of the crowds. And that status is priceless. So that's some of the ways that status can help you answer the questions that you don't know the answer to yet. There are a few more, and we will talk about them